What's up, all you Minties? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and welcome to part 4 of the comprehensive reading order of X-Men in collected editions. Today we're going to be focusing from 2004 all the way to 2008, although that may not seem like a lot of years, it is a lot to talk about. So everything from X-Men, Phoenix Endsong, all the way up until AVX. So, let's do this thing. And welcome back, everybody. Before getting started, a huge thank you to our patrons for voting for the X-Men reading order. Every month I put up a poll. Sometimes this time around it's for 3 months worth of work, but I put up a poll for our patrons to decide what the next reading order should be, and X-Men this time around beat out Superman. If you're interested in the written documentation of this reading order, that is available through our Patreon, and I believe that starts at the $1 tier, and that will be up here in the next day or so. So we have a lot to discuss. As I said in the intro, this may seem like way more than just a few years, but believe it or not, this is just a few years, and this is where the complexity and holy crap, the headaches began. But I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to talk about, and I can't keep talking about it like I normally do with the other parts, so we got to go and knock this out. So let's go ahead and get started with where I think you should start reading, and that is with the Phoenix Endsong. Omar, what the heck are you doing? You're doing an X-Men reading order and you're starting with X-Men Phoenix Endsong? Because I think it's important to read this. I know I mainly focus on Uncanny, Adjectiveless X-Men, New X-Men, and what will be X-Men Legacy, and Astonishing X-Men, and Wolverine and the X-Men. Woo, we got a lot to talk about. But I feel like this is a very important series to talk about because it comes into play later on as you're reading the Uncanny X-Men series and X-Men Legacy. So this is X-Men Endsong, Phoenix Endsong. It is written by Greg Pak. You've got artwork here by Greg Land. And actually his artwork, I know a lot of people give him crap, but it kind of works with this particular story. So it is maybe or may not be the return of Jean Grey / Phoenix. Remember when I talked a little bit about what happened to her in New X-Men? Well, this is the ramifications of that and what could possibly happen to her. So she, the Phoenix Force comes back, and there's a little bit of a cliffhanger later on that plays a big role in a follow-up series to this. But the follow-up series I don't think needs to be read, and but you can find it in Warsong if you're interested in following this particular storyline. So this one's huge. This one is big. This is the return of Chris Claremont to Uncanny X-Men. So when Extreme X-Men was canceled, they gave Chris Claremont the chance to come back and write his favorite characters that he had written for 17 years and then came back during Revolution. So this is the era of X-Men Reloaded, or Reload, by Chris Claremont, and he returns with Alan Davis. Alan Davis, of course, has worked with Chris Claremont many times, mostly known for their run on Excalibur. But here they are together, coming back to X-Men. This also helps introduce the character of Laura, X-23, into the lives of the X-Men. So she had first appeared in NYX, and she originated in the TV series X-Men Evolution. But she did come into play during this time, and Laura was a little bit different. She's a lot different now. There she is, right there, wearing Fang's costume for some reason. But this is the return of Chris Claremont to X-Men, and this is collected in a series of trade paperbacks. There's some that have been out of print, but these are the thicker trades, so these are known as the X-Men Reload by Chris Claremont. You have the talents of Salvador Larroca, Alan Davis, you also have Oliver Copiel, and a few other artists. I think Billy Tan even joins later on, and then, of course, Chris Bacalo. But Chris Claremont, writing X-Men the way that he loves writing them, and that is trouble, always comes searching for the X-Men. So when Chuck Austen exited both Uncanny X-Men and X-Men, we had Chris Claremont take over Uncanny, and then Adjectiveless X-Men was taken over by Peter Milligan. Of course, Peter Milligan has had a huge run over at DC Comics for many things, and he has now, it was pretty interesting to choose him to come over, and then also the next writer that takes over after Peter Milligan. It was an interesting choice by the editors back then at Marvel. So he has teamed up with Salvador Larroca, and the team is kind of like the leftover team of what Chuck Austen had. So you have characters like Polaris, Rogue, Gambit, Havoc. There's a crossover here with Black Panther. the White Queen, and all of this drawn. I love this time of Salvador Larroca. And of course, I'm talking about Salvador Larroca, and this is in his artwork here. Here's the crossover with the green, or the Black Panther, rather. So, now he does more light box artwork these days, but back then, when he was doing Extreme X-Men and this stuff, oh man, his art was just so good. Now, there is a second complete collection coming out later on this year as of this video, but right now, these stories. But as of this video, there's only one complete collection and then some smaller trades. Now, this had previously been released in a series of smaller trade paperbacks that also included the crossover, but they have now a complete collection of it. And the other important thing to note is when the name reverted back to Adjectiveless X-Men, as we like to call it, the title of New Mutants became New X-Men. And I'll do an updated reading order of New Mutants later, but it gets so confusing. But this is really a follow-up to New Mutants, and that's why I'm not including it as part of this readathon here. Now, let's keep going. So, when Grant Morrison left, they offered the chance to Joss Whedon to come in and write as New X-Men. However, they thought it was a big deal, so they were like, you know what? We're going to give him his own title. We're going to give it Astonishing X-Men. It's the title that Joss Whedon. So Joss Whedon, famous for writing Buffy, Angel, Firefly, one of the greatest TV shows ever, reintroduces us to the character. Oh my gosh. I could do a whole video just on this and how much this particular omnibus means to me and how many times I've read it, but this to me was solidifying my love of comics. So I left with Onslaught, I came back with Grant Morrison's New X-Men, and this was like, yeah, this is where I belong. I'm never leaving comics again. This is like coming home. This particular storyline called Gifted is the first 6 issues, and that's what I'm telling you to read right now. So this is the new cast of Astonishing X-Men. We have Cyclops, Emma Frost, who's more and more now the good guys, and Beast, who, I forgot to mention this, that during the Morrison's New X-Men, Morrison did a couple of things with the characters. They created this sense of a second mutation, so Beast kept mutating into this feral-like creature instead of the ape that he was, and he's kind of kept mutating since then. And then Emma Frost could turn herself into Diamond, so some characters got second mutations. Wolverine joins the team as well as Kate Pryde. So, this is the Astonishing team. So much different than New X-Men because they're like, hey, we're going to do away with all the leather jackets. We're done with that era. We need to astonish them. The important thing in the first 6 issues to note is the return of a classic character. And so just a little bit of a spoiler because I have to talk about this moment because, well, if I keep talking about X-Men, I have to keep bringing this up. And that is the return of Colossus. To me, him and Kitty have always been the heart and soul of the X-Men. And then, of course, I've got 2 words for you, bub. Fastball special, baby. Alright, so after reading the first 6 issues, I strongly suggest reading House of M. This is the crossover with the Avengers, and it was only supposed to be an Astonishing X-Men and Avengers crossover, but then it kind of became a Marvel-wide event. But I feel like this is really important to read right now because this gives us a new status quo for not just the X-Men, but mutants. So I'm not going to go into detail as to how all this happens or what this storyline is about other than it's an alternate reality, and you know I'm a sucker for those kind of stories. But the important thing to note about this is after this crossover, the mutant population shrinks down to only 198 mutants. So when there were lots of mutants, especially during Morrison's era of New X-Men, we had a whole mutant town, we had all the Morlocks. Now there's only 198 mutants. That's the big thing to get out of this. So that takes us to Chris Claremont, Uncanny X-Men Reload, House of M. So there was a crossover, like I said, a Marvel-wide crossover event where the reality started shaping and becoming something else. And just about every comic book creator had to write in a storyline with that particular premise about an alternate reality. I think this is when Alan Davis just said, you know, I think I've had it with alternate realities and mandated crossover. So he left the book, and then Chris Bachalo came in. There's also the Decimation that's collected in here, which is the day after. And this is a one-shot, kind of giving you the new status quo of who's lost their power, what X-Men character or what X-Men family member has lost their power. Oh my gosh, the end of Grace. This is such a... I really like this story arc. But this is where a bunch of Shi'ar characters come in and try to wipe out the Grey Line because they blame Jean Grey for destroying the universe and the galaxies and the cosmos, and they want to wipe out that line. So, of course, that impacts poor Rachel. But sadly, gosh, I wish I had more time to talk about all this stuff. This is where Chris Claremont ends his run with the Uncanny X-Men for the third time. Who knows? Maybe one day he'll come back, but this is the last time he writes Uncanny X-Men as far as being the ongoing writer. And like I mentioned, Roger Cruz has a fill-in issue, but there's also Billy Tan as well as Chris Bachalo that does the main artwork for this particular volume. Meanwhile, in Adjectiveless X-Men, we have Peter Milligan dealing with the effects, or the after effects, sorry, of Decimation. So like I mentioned, some characters have lost their powers. Still, Salvador La Roca kicking all kinds of ass with his artwork. But now we have... this is such a weird time for X-Men. Now we have a bunch of Sentinels around the X-Mansion. So this, to me, just really felt weird. I was like, when are the X-Men ever going... Like, why would they ever let a bunch of Sentinels just let them be locked up in their X-Mansion? That made no sense to me. And some of the mutants that we have been reading about had lost their powers, but maybe it wasn't really that they had lost their powers. Maybe something else was going on. And then in the background, we have, of course, the return of the X-Men... one of their biggest arch nemesis, Apocalypse, and he is recruiting brand new horsemen, which takes us to the Blood of Apocalypse. Now, most people will tell you, yeah, Chuck Austin's run is horrible on X-Men. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Brian Michael Bendis' X-Men run. I think, to me, this might be my least favorite X-Men, and I've read a lot of stuff that broke my heart and a lot of stuff that just was not on par with X-Men. But to me, I think Peter Milligan, who I usually love as a writer, X-Force, Ecstatics, all the stuff he did at DC, but for some reason, this stuff just... No, I don't think he understood X-Men. Maybe it's just me. I could be alone. But now, if there ever was to be an omnibus of a Peter Milligan run, you damn right I'd buy it, though. Come on now. That's the X-curse, right? You're mandated to buy those things in oversized format. And besides, it would have Salvador La Roca's artwork. By the way, later on this year, there will be a volume 2 of Peter Milligan's collection, and it'll be in a complete collection called, I think it's called The Blood of Apocalypse. Now, one thing I'm going to sneak in here is the Astonishing X-Men Companion, which really has nothing to do with the Astonishing X-Men, but this wraps up the rest of the X-Men Unlimited series. That the first ongoing series, the quarterly series, and then it became a monthly series, and then volume 2. So that's actually no, this is all volume 2 if I'm not mistaken. My bad. The new X-Men Companion had the first volume, but this just spotlights different characters. Some of them that are no longer with us as of the time here, and then others that were still around in different teams but didn't get a lot of the spotlight. And of course, you have to have your Wolverine issues in here. There's some wonderful talent, some early work by some talent that broke out later. But this is where I suggest reading this and just go ahead and reading it all. I don't think it's going to ruin anything. Now, the next step I'm going to tell you to go, even though it does not say X-Men, is The Road to War of the Kings. Because while Chris Claremont was wrapping up his run on Uncanny X-Men, Ed Brubaker was coming off of Captain America. He was still writing some, but Marvel hired him to do this miniseries called Deadly Genesis, which is a retcon of the New Genesis storyline, which was Giant Size X-Men #1, where they introduce a bunch of new characters to go and rescue the old original X-Men. Well, according to, I don't know if this is Ed Brubaker or the editors, apparently that new X-Men team with Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Sunfire, Thunderbird was the second team. There was another team that Professor Xavier sent into Krakoa to go and rescue his students. And what happens to that team? Well, you can find out for yourself, but one of the biggest members of that team is this guy right here, the third Summers brother. You can find out how they're all related by reading this, and that is Vulcan, who plays a big part in the next story arc that happens here in a little bit. Now, to replace Peter Milligan on Adjectiveless X-Men, there came another guy from a big DC world, and that is Mike Carey, who had written Lucifer, who had written Hellblazer, and this guy's is probably, to me, there's a couple underrated writers on X-Men, and this guy right here, Mike Carey, happens to be one of them. So, this is Supernovas. This is the first volume of his run right here. This is collected in trade paperback format and also in this oversized hardcover format. We're introduced to the concept of these children of the vault. Now, if you're currently reading X-Men by Jonathan Hickman, you know that the stories of the children of the vault still play heavily with the Dawn of X era. So I guess I'm not the only one that thought this run was really underrated. He uses a bunch of characters here that hadn't been used in a long time. Mr. Sinister makes his return. Exodus makes his return. And he really knows how to write the character of Rogue. Now, he is at first joined by Chris Bacalo, and then eventually Humberto Ramos takes over the run. This is also when Mystique and Sabretooth end up joining the X-Men for this Children of the Vault story arc. But here's what the artwork looks like. And Cannonball, once again, graduating to X-Men status. But that's never really the case. Because, man, that guy just can't win. He has to keep getting knocked back down to New Mutants. Even when they try to graduate him into the pages of Avengers, he still is a New Mutant at heart. So we also have Northstar and Aurora. And Northstar sticks around with the X-Men for a long time. Now, that was something that Chuck Austen did. There's a lot of things that Chuck Austen messed up with, but I thought it was really cool to get Northstar to join the team in Uncanny X-Men when he was taking over that run. Next up is Blinded by the Light. To me, this is probably one of the best X-Men storylines. We have a new team leader of Rogue, and I love these covers. This is X-Men 2. How is this not an oversized format? Despite of how you feel about Chris Bacalo's artwork or Humberto Ramos, that is awesome. I'd love to see those as covers for an omnibus of Mike Carey's run. I love Rogue's look. There's Lady Mastermind. You may know this character later on, the Omega Sentinel. Again, playing a big part in House and Powers of X. And I forgot Cable is also a part of this era. So you have right now Rogue dealing with a lot of things going on in her personal life. And this, even though it feels like it's rushed and he doesn't get to play out a lot of his storylines that he wanted to, mainly because we're leading up to something called the Messiah Complex. By the way, he loves using these precog characters, not only Destiny later on, even though she is currently dead during this timeline, but also Blindside here. So, yeah. You can find out exactly what Mike Carey helped build. Oh, look at these returning characters that we hadn't seen for a long time. Random, Frenzy, Tempo, and of course Exodus. I love the way Humberto Ramos draws him. Now, in the War of the Kings omnibus, and these are also in trade paperback format, by the way, the Deadly Genesis, and this right here, which is the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire, or what I like to call this era, X-Men in space. So Ed Brubaker replaces Chris Claremont. And I remember, he picked Warpath to go up into space. But anyway, it is about redeeming the character of Vulcan. Vulcan's gone crazy. This is the third Summers brother. So Professor Xavier gets a team of X-Men of Havoc, Polaris, Rachel Summers, who is now back on the team because she was in Claremont's Uncanny X-Men. So back in Brubaker's Uncanny, Nightcrawler, and Warpath. And there's a couple of other characters that join later on, but I can't reveal exactly who. And they're going to rescue Vulcan. Meanwhile, Vulcan wants to take over the Shi'ar Empire. So while everything else is going on and crazy here on Earth, and things are about to shape up and go into the Endangered Species and Messiah Complex, Brubaker's X-Men were just in space having fun. Well, not really having fun. There's a lot of things that happen here, some character deaths, and it's just a badass storyline. There's also a mini-series that's collected in this particular, this right here, the X-Men Emperor Vulcan #1. This is what I was talking about. In this particular omnibus, it's not really necessary to read. But if you want to keep reading about the characters that are in space, this is definitely where to go. I'm really surprised that they didn't collect Ed Brubaker's run on Uncanny X-Men in oversized format. I mean, other than the rise and fall of the Shi'ar Empire, we don't have anything else collected in oversized format, unless you're looking at the pages of the modern Cosmic Saga. So here are the X-Men, the remaining characters that did not stay stranded in space, and they are here on Earth, and how they're dealing with adapting, losing some of their friends. Salvador La Roca now joins Ed Brubaker on what is probably almost his final stint on Uncanny X-Men. By the way, you probably noticed that Hepzibah from the Starjammers is now hanging out with them. And this is a pretty interesting read. I really enjoyed this time of X-Men. It was different. And like I said, I like the aspect that the X-Men were separated. Some of them were in space, and then some of them are here on Earth. You know I love sneaking things in, and this is where I'm going to sneak this one in. This is Giant Size X-Men. Mainly to read Giant Size X-Men 3 and 4, which is a really cool idea that they had. They're really short stories, but the original idea was to have Joss Whedon write this story right here with Dave Cockrum on artwork. However, Dave Cockrum got sick, and of course we eventually lost him. So Neil Adams stepped in to do the artwork. Chris Yost doing, I think he did issue 4. And then this also collects Deadly Genesis, but that's mainly where I think you should read this, issues 3 and 4 of Giant Size X-Men. I think it'd do good to read it here now. And then things start happening in the background of these issues. So this is Endangered Species. This collects the one-shot as well as the backup stories through the pages of X-Factor, through the pages of Uncanny X-Men, through the pages of Adjectiveless X-Men, because we're about to have our big crossover in modern times. It's been a while since the X-Men had a crossover, and I know I feel ridiculous saying that, but if you think about it, going back to the pages of Morrison's New X-Men, or even Astonishing, and I promise I haven't forgotten about Astonishing, I'm going to tell you where to finish reading that here in a second. We haven't had a crossover. So all of this is setting up this event right here, and this is Messiah Complex. Oh my gosh. Mark Silvestri, again, lending his pencils and artwork for the one-shot. But this has so many bad guys in this crossover. The Marauders. You have the return of the Purifiers. The return of the Acolytes. Oh man, this is such an awesome crossover. It's in my top 10 favorite X-Men crossovers of all time. But this pretty much... There's a new beacon that lights up. Remember when I said that their mutant kind had been dwindled down to only 198? Well, a new light shows up, and it's somewhere out in Alaska, and the X-Men have to go and find whoever this new baby is. What the hell? What's going on? Who is this new baby? How can there be a baby born during this time? Now, this is the characters of the new X-Men that show up here. So this is a crossover with X-Factor, New X-Men, and of course, Uncanny and Adjectiveless. But this is Messiah Complex, which later on, this is known as the Messiah Trilogy, or part 1 of the Messiah Trilogy. Now, it is in this crossover event that we get to find out a little bit more about the mysterious Bishop, even though he's had his own series, his mini-series, his sister, even him and his sister had their own series. But the important thing that happens here, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, is that Bishop, for some reason, I don't know if this was editorial mandate or what, kind of betrays the X-Men and accidentally shoots Professor Xavier in the head when he was trying to kill this baby. And you can find out why he's trying to kill this baby. So Professor Xavier is shot in the head, and it ends up in a weird cliffhanger. He kind of just disappears, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But not before we talk about this wonderful series right here and wrapping it up. So go ahead and finish reading the rest of Astonishing X-Men. All of this written by Joss Whedon, drawn by John Cassaday. Delay after delay after delay, and honestly it feels almost like a standalone little pocket corner of the X-Men universe, so I think it's okay to read right now, and it doesn't really spoil anything, but it does happen, something does happen towards the end of this that kind of leaves one of the characters out of the spotlight for a little while. And we're also introduced to the character of Armor in this, who plays a bigger role in the next few arcs of Astonishing X-Men. So here we have Divided We Stand. So this is where Ed Brubaker wraps up his run on Uncanny X-Men. This is drawn by the phenomenal Mike Choi, who does not get enough work in, at least at Marvel Comics. I really missed this guy's artwork. He was the artist on X-Force during Colin Yost's run on X-Force. Just a phenomenal artist, beautifully drawn. The storyline, kind of weird for Ed Brubaker to leave the book, but I think he was ready to go. I think he kind of co-wrote some of the first few issues that Matt Fraction did, but I think his time on X-Men was just right. I gotta say, writing X-Men has to be difficult. Now, for the second time, the title of Adjectiveless X-Men changes again. This time it changes over to X-Men Legacy. So, remember when I said Professor Xavier got shot by Bishop at the end of Messiah Complex? Well, this shows the aftermath. What happened to Professor X? He disappeared. Well, Exodus and a bunch of the Acolytes take his body. So this works kind of like a flashback to Professor Xavier's younger years. A little bit of a retcon. Has a lot to do with his dad. Mr. Sinister plays a big role in a bunch of this. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of really good storylines that Mike Carey got to build, and he is teamed up at the beginning with Scott Eaton, and then you have Billy Tan, John Romita Jr. does some of the artwork in here. So here we have Uncanny X-Men by Matt Fraction Volume 1. And like I mentioned, Ed Brubaker writes the first few issues, many variant covers for that issue 500. I think I still have the Michael Turner one. But this kind of gives us a new status quo for X-Men. The X-Men have been fighting in space. The X-Men have been fighting other nemesing mutants. Now it's time for the X-Men to kind of create their own nation. Cyclops decides, I'm tired of just fighting all these bad guys. It's time to start our own Utopia. And that's exactly what he does. He starts his own Utopia, so they built this artificial island on the coast of San Francisco, off the coast of San Francisco, not on the coast, off the coast of San Francisco, and they call it Utopia, where all the mutants can come over. Now, one of the things that he does is, Matt Fraction, when he takes over the book, is he kind of puts the spotlight on characters like Pixie. He gives us the character of Namor when he comes over and joins the team. There are elements of Magneto trying to redeem himself. But we have Greg Land doing some of the artwork. We have Terry Dodson doing some of the artwork. And yeah, this was an interesting... Oh, we also have, again, the character of Quanon coming back. Armor playing a bigger role. But yes, Quanon comes back to... make us more confused. Who's the real Betsy Braddock? Well, I think that's still being played out these days, but you can find out for yourself by reading this particular book. This has been previously collected in trade paperback format. There is an oversized hardcover called Nation X, so you can pick up some of the stories in there. Some of the miniseries are collected in here, but I figured I'd focus more on this because this has more of the complete Matt Fraction Uncanny X-Men run than the OHC did. Like, it had the X-Men Divided miniseries. Okay, here we go. I never do this in reading orders, but I just love this these variant covers. The Michael Turner, I still have that one, and I think I still have the X-Women one by Terry Dodson. There's the Alex Ross one, and then the big Alex Ross cover. And other variants. Alright, let's keep going. Then we have X-Men Legacy Sins of the Father. And this adds Gambit into the whole mythos of Professor Xavier's background, what he has to do with Mr. Sinister. And I realize, holy crap, we got a lot to talk about. So I got to start flying through here and, vaguely give you a description of what's happening. So, again, trying to retcon a lot of the past storylines of Professor Xavier, his own stepfather, Kane Marco's father, and their ties to Mr. Sinister, and what it could mean for Professor X. If you've not read this, this is such an interesting take on the character of Xavier. So after Joss Whedon's run on Astonishing X-Men, the editors decided to continue the series. And who to get to write the series? None other than Warren Ellis. So Warren Ellis comes in, and Warren Ellis, he just writes this a lot different than Joss Whedon. This is more of a mystery, and there's sci-fi elements and fantasy elements, and it's just gorgeously drawn by Simone Bianchi. It's a little confusing and very complicated storyline. And also the delays of this book really killed it, because I think it took almost a year for these issues to finish up that are collected within these pages here. So this kicks off the era of Warren Ellis's run. Then we have our mandatory crossover event in the pages of X-Men Legacy and the pages of Daniel Way's Wolverine origin. think I do not shy away of how I feel about Daniel Way's run on Wolverine Origin, but this again helps to establish the character of Xavier and his ties with Wolverine. The pages on X-Men Legacy show that they had met before, but it's not the first time that that's happened. We've had Chris Claremont mention that in the past, so it's nothing new to the characters that they have previously met. It's nothing new to retcon things, but like I said, this is the crossover with Wolverine Origins, and now we have Mike Deodato on artwork on X-Men Legacy. So here is where things start to turn. This is when the focus shifts over to Rogue. So Rogue comes back. She's been gone for just a little bit, and we know Mike Carey liked using her. He made her the leader of his team. And it starts focusing less and less on Xavier and focusing more and more on Rogue. And then we also have Gambit. We have the character of Danger, who was introduced through the pages of Astonishing X-Men. This character right here, and she is called Danger for a reason. Some people think it's hokey and funny. I happen to really enjoy her character. But I definitely think this is where you should come and read next. And this is also a good character study on Rogue, like her background, what makes her the way that she is, and that's found in the pages of X-Men Legacy Salvage. So back to the pages of Astonishing X-Men, Exogenetic. This is a pretty interesting, far-fetched kind of story, but this is really when a character is obsessed with the X-Men. So this character, even though Grant Morrison touched upon this on their run on New X-Men, we talked about the theory of like how the X-Men are hated, right? But this guy refuses to believe that. Why are they hated? They're good-looking people. They don't look like monsters. They're not deformed like I am. That's the basis of the villain of this particular storyline. Whereas, like, in the Ghost Boxes, the reveal of the villain isn't until the very end. By the way, I'm not a fan of that either, because I happen to like that character. But anyway, in this, it was pretty early on. You get to find out exactly who the villain is, and it's an okay storyline. Phil Jimenez joins Warren Ellis on this particular story. Now we bounce back to the pages of Uncanny X-Men. Now it is purely just Matt Fraction writing the story. By now, Ed Brubaker is gone, so it's all just Matt Fraction writing this particular storyline. Now, in here, you'll find the crossover event called Dark Avengers Uncanny X-Men Utopia. And we'll talk about that here in a second. So that whole event is collected in here, but I like to own it in oversized hardcover format. So let's look at that. So this is available in oversized hardcover format. It is also available in trade paperback format. And again, in the Uncanny X-Men by Matt Fraction Collection Volume 2. One-shot drawn by the phenomenal Mark Silvestri. And this is the big crossover fight with the Dark Avengers. So this is during Norman Osborn's era as the leader of Hammer and having his own team of Dark Avengers. You can read all about that. I haven't done an Avengers reading order, have I? Maybe it's time I do that. So it's father versus son again as Wolverine has to fight Dark Wolverine. And all the X-Men are having a fight. All these characters that... The Dark Avengers were very much like the Thunderbolts, honestly. But hey, whatever. Brian Michael Bendis got to play around with these characters for a long time. So this collects the one-shots and then, of course, the crossover events. So we go back to X-Men Legacy. And this is Emplate. And Emplate, of course, being the character from Generation X who likes to eat the bone marrow of mutants. The more powerful, the more he loves to suck on their bone marrow. So a character, a young student from Grant Morrison's team gets kidnapped. It's up to the team to go and get the character back. So by now, the important thing to note is that it's Daniel Acuna drawing the artwork. So he has this painted art style. I forgot about this too. I don't think this was ever really resolved, where Gambit keeps going back to his death days when he was one of the Horsemen of Apocalypse, and I don't think Mike Carey ever got to resolve that. And then we get this right here. This is Warren Ellis's Astonishing X-Men Xenogenesis. And this serves as a follow-up to Ghost Box. This is drawn by the phenomenal Kerry Andrews. And Kerry Andrews has a really unique style and can also morph his style into any type of art. I've seen him draw things like Frank Miller style. I've seen him do anime style of art. And then we have this stuff right here, this kind of artwork. And by now, you probably noticed that the team is of Emma Frost, Beast, Wolverine. Cyclops is still there, of course. Storm, and Armor. And remember when I said armor plays an important part here? This is the story arcs where she plays an important part. This is interesting too because this also collects the Ghost Box issue 1. Anyway, it's delay after delay is what caused this miniseries to happen. All right. So I'm sneaking this in here, like I usually like to sneak in books, and this is the Messiah War, which is kind of a follow-up to the Messiah Complex story, but this focuses more on the character of Cable and the character of Bishop, and their ongoing just fight through years, decades, trying to fight each other. Cable now has Hope in his arms, and just protecting her at all costs. This is the crossover with X-Force, but it does help set up the next event. And that is Necrotia X, or X Necrotia. Oh my gosh, look at this wonderful artwork by Clayton Crane. You also have Mike Choi doing this. Now this event, ironically, or coincidentally, happened at the same time that Blackest Night was going on. And it's practically the same type of premise. You have a bunch of characters coming back from the dead, including in the pages of X-Men Legacy, Destiny. See when I said that he likes to play along or play with those precogs? Yeah. So we have characters, whether they were good or bad, coming back from the dead, all because of Selene the Black Queen, and this kind of sets up the last story arc of X-Force in the Colin Yost era. All right, we got to keep going. Which takes us to the final part of what I like to call the Messiah trilogy, and that is Second Coming. Now, some people will say Messiah War is obviously the second part of the Messiah trilogy, but I feel like X Necrotia was the second part of the Messiah trilogy. And this wraps up that series. This wraps up the entire Colin Yost era. This is also the death of a very popular, beloved character from the pages of X-Men. And Mike Choi supplies the artwork during this crossover. There's a lot of talent that is behind, like Terry Dotson draws a lot of this stuff. David Finch, I believe, kicks off the one-shot. Yeah. And then this serves also as the very first place where you get the team of Uncanny X-Force. Because we have the Black Ops team of X-Force, but this serves as the very first place where you get the team of Uncanny X-Force, which happens in the pages of Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force. By now, Hope, the little baby from the pages of Messiah Complex, is now a teenager. So let's keep going. There's also a Second Coming Revelations oversized hardcover. Not sure why I'm whispering, but some of the stories that are not collected in Second Coming are collected in this OHC. Both of these are available also in trade paperback format. And here we have the final complete collection of Matt Fraction's run on Uncanny X-Men. So Cyclops is trying to keep his Nation X together, his Utopia together, especially after the events of the Dark Avengers versus the X-Men. And then we have this guy right here, Magneto, who's, been good guy, bad guy, can't make up his mind. He makes them a pact. He's like, look, I'm gonna bring back a character that has been gone for a while, but you guys have to let me lead or join the team at least. And then Cyclops is like, what? All right, man, whatever, sure, go ahead. Whilst Portacio comes back to the book. Whilst Portacio, the guy that co-created Bishop, the guy that gave us X-Men Gold along with Chris Claremont, and Jim Lee, John Byrne back then. But anyway, he comes back to draw Uncanny X-Men. So it's good to see all these other artists that had worked on the book come back, like Mark Silvestri, Whilst Portacio. I'd love for Jim Lee to come back. But anyway, this is the return of a beloved character, and Magneto keeps his word. Then we go back to the pages of Astonishing X-Men with Monstrous. And this is all written by Daniel Way. Jason Pearson does the artwork. And this is just a giant fight with kaiju, like with big monsters. That's exactly what this is. We have Fing Fang Foom here. And Nick Bradshaw supplies some of the artwork in here too. That's why I love this stuff. The story, yeah, kind of silly, but whatever. I mean, really, that's it. It's just the X-Men fighting these giant kaiju, these giant monsters. And you also have the backup story here from Strange Tales featuring Fing Fang Foom. All right, so Magneto is back. Him and Rogue have had a thing in the past. Maybe they're gonna get back together. Maybe not. Rogue is way too busy doing other things like, I don't know, leading the X-Men. By the way, the art you're looking at looks a lot like Olivier Coipel, but it is Clay Mann. And this particular storyline, I really like this, actually. This is where he brings back the Children of the Vault. Yeah, so these guys are back, and it ties heavily into Rogue and her past, and a lot of the things going on with mutant kind, especially elsewhere. You know, it starts off as a trip to another country, but then, of course, the X-Men are attacked. And then you see Magneto's true intentions, what he wants to do. He really is a good guy that wants to help out. So there's all these new characters from the pages of New Mutants / New X-Men. Now, not only do we have Uncanny X-Men, we have X-Men Legacy, we have Astonishing X-Men. So what do? Let's go ahead and do another X-Men title. Adjectiveless X-Men comes back with Curse of the Mutants. And this is written by Victor Gischler and Paco Medina supplying the artwork. So this has Dracula coming back. It was a big time for Dracula. Blade is also in this particular volume. There he is. So this sets up the new status quo for Dracula in the Marvel Universe. He looks a little bit different, a little more super sexy, if you will. But not just that. As far as affecting the world of mutant kind, this is more about Jubilee and what happens to her. Now, there was other spin-off series that are all collected in another trade paperback. I think it's just called Mutants, Curse of the Mutants, or something like that. But this is a interesting way to kick off an X-Men title. Never did I think, other than every once in a while, when the X-Men are fighting Dracula, that they would be heavily involved with Dracula and the vampires. But I suggest going ahead and reading the second story arc. This one is drawn by Pris Bacalo, and this is the With Great Power story arc that teams them up with Spider-Man, and also features the Lizard here. But this is, I love his artwork, and this right here, this is after Mark Buckingham stopped inking his stuff. Feels a lot different. Some people don't like this stuff. It's a lot sketchier, but I really enjoy this type of art from Chris Bacalo. I think his art is superb, especially during this run. And by now, yes, the X-Men are done dealing with the vampires. They're their own thing. But don't worry, they'll keep popping back in and out. Hey, there's Pixie and Jubilee. Now, these two next trades go hand in hand, because I suggest reading 242 to 244 here, and then stopping, and then going and reading this crossover event that is mainly with the New Mutants, and that is the Age of X. So in a world where X-Men had never been, that's what this is about, humanity is winning the fight against mutants. Mutants are banding together with new leaders. This is what the Age of X is. And honestly, this one is hit and miss with people. Some people think about it and they're like, that was such a forgettable storyline. But I think there's some strong moments in here, especially in the Aftermath, which, let's get back to that. So like I mentioned, in the Aftermath, this is what happens before and after Age of X. The cool thing in the Aftermath is that some of the characters are able to remember. There's Blindside, loves using her. Some of the characters are able to remember what happened during that Age of X. And then they have the choice of either keeping those memories or getting rid of them. I thought that was really cool. That was a really interesting thing to do, especially making the characters have that choice. And that can all be found in the pages of this trade paperback. Alright, taking us to Uncanny X-Men by Kieron Gillen. So after Matt Fraction leaves the book, Kieron Gillen takes over the run. Now, this is includes the S.W.O.R.D miniseries, which I was not a fan of the way that... I did like Death's Head showing up, but I wasn't a fan of the way Beast was drawn. So Beast to me always looked like a cat, or like an ape when he first had his Wolverine haircut in the pages of X Factor, especially when Walter Simonson was drawing him. But for some reason, this guy drew him like a horse. But hey, whatever. But the important thing is now we have Kieron Gillen taking over Uncanny X-Men. So as much as I love Mike Carey on X-Men Legacy, I think Kieron Gillen's run is just as good. And now he didn't stay as long as Mike Carey did on the pages of X-Men Legacy, sadly. But now he's joined by some phenomenal artists in here. We have Carlos Pacheco, we have Terry Dodson, and then there's also Greg Land. And I know how people feel about him. He's kind of hit and miss with some people. This also ties heavily with some events that were going on at Marvel, such as Fear itself. Because what else? Or how else are we going to make Colossus powerful? Oh, I don't know. Let's give him Juggernaut's cider rack so he can use Juggernaut's armor. Now, when I do these reading orders, I have the hardest time telling people when to stop reading something to go read something else, unless it's crucial and important or it might spoil things. So, I ask people here to stop reading Uncanny X-Men in the final issue with 544, and then go read Schism. And we will come back to this, I promise, after Schism. So we've seen the aftermath. We know what happens with some of the characters from Age of X. This is kind of the aftermath of the aftermath, because after Age of X, Legion lets loose a bunch of his personalities, and of course not all of them are good. So this is about capturing those personalities, and this is, honestly, this is when you start realizing why this title is called X-Men Legacy. Because, you know, David Haller is the son of Professor Xavier. You have Professor Xavier's legacy, and the ties that he has to Sinister, and what it could mean for the future of mutant kind. You also have Rogue, who's able to absorb people's powers, and not just that, but also their memories. So there's all kinds of things going on with the word legacy, and it wasn't until this particular volume of all volumes that made me realize, oh, that actually makes sense why they call it that. So we go back to adjectiveless X-Men. It feels so weird saying that after talking about X-Men Legacy. But now we have Christopher Yost, so half the team of Colin Yost, coming in and writing this story about time travel, and he is joined by Paco Medina. So the stories that you may have read, like especially when I talk about this in part 5 with All New X-Men, with Bendis' All New X-Men, honestly, a lot of it happened through this little mini-series. There's also Celestials involved. And yeah, this wonderful kick-ass artwork by Paco Medina. It's freaking awesome. And now we have Children of the Brood. So we go back to the 4th X-Men title, and that is Astonishing X-Men, Children of the Brood. Christos Gage now joins this team. We have Salvador La Roca, even though it doesn't look like him. I remember looking at that cover and thinking, that does not look like Salvador La Roca. Or just doing the cover art, because that looks like an anime style. But we have the artist that was drawing She-Hulk at the time with Dan Slott, Juan Bobillo, doing the internal artwork. And Juan Bobillo is another one of these artists that's either hit or miss. I happen to enjoy it. So it's the return of this... Uncanny Omar talked pretty one day. Uncanny Omar been talking a lot. It's the return of the Sleesoids. Look at that Arthur Adams cover. Man, that's hot. It's the return of the Sleesoids in here, and that's what basically this is. There's also another backup story back here, but mainly this is the fight with the Brood. So Gischler comes back to Adjectiveless X-Men, and this is a team-up between Cyclops and Wolverine, Emma Frost, Magneto, Pixie, Dr. Nemesis, and they're fighting along the side of the core team of the Fantastic Four. So yeah, there's Pixie again. Man, every writer liked to use that character, I swear. And during this time, there's also Doctor Doom hanging out with the Fantastic Four. Honestly, out of all these series, even, I think this one here, this one was okay. Like, out of all 4 series, I think this is the one that I didn't look forward to the most when I was reading the books. Just because to me, it just kind of fell flat compared to the other series, even including Astonishing, which wasn't that great after Whedon left. And we go back to X-Men Legacy. And it's really weird because X-Men Legacy was the title that wasn't selling back then. People weren't talking about this back then. And even now I don't hear people talk about Kieron Gillen. It's like the nerdy X fans that are like, oh yeah, you remember Kieron Gillen's run and Mike Carey's run on X-Men Legacy? Yeah, that was great. So this is awesome because Mike Carey knows a lot of his history and also can write a damn good book. And outside of Claremont, he stayed on X-Men the longest time. I think his run was 7 years on X-Men. So this particular storyline focuses on Rachel reaching out to her friends, the X-Men. So Rogue leads a bunch of team of X-Men to go and rescue the X-Men that are trapped in space because of the events of Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire. And yeah, brings Rachel back. This is I love this stuff. And sadly, I don't think Carey got to actually do a lot of the storyline, especially towards the end of his run that he wanted to start wrapping up. Now we move over to Wolverine Goes to Hell Omnibus. Why? Because this contains the next story arc that is crucial to X-Men, and that is X-Men Schism. So the X-Men have been living in Utopia during this time. They're all getting along. We have Cyclops getting along with Wolverine. Everybody loves each other. And they're all living in this artificial island of Utopia on the coast of San Francisco. Well, everything is about to come to an end because there's going to be a huge fight. A schism, if you will. But all 5 issues of this is collected in this omnibus. There's also an oversized hardcover of Schism, and there's a trade paperback of it. But it's mainly to serve as a huge fight between Cyclops and Wolverine because they're about to break up after this. Next up, we have Astonishing X-Men Exalted. Now, this doesn't show you the aftermath of what happened in the pages of Schism, but, you know, Wolverine and Cyclops were a big part of this book. So this, I think, can be read right afterwards, and this is a alternate reality of creating new characters that play a bigger role later on. And yeah, we're introduced to new characters from an alternate reality, such as Logan there. And here, actually, let's talk about it, because after this, we get another Extreme X-Men title. So this is Extreme X-Men. This title didn't last very long, but there's Captain Howlett, what's her name? Emmeline, Frost, Kit, Nightcrawler, there's also Dazzler. They are lost in different dimensions. So think of exiles, that they come from different dimensions and they're trying to get back home. That's practically what this series was about. And the series only lasted 13 issues, and I don't think anybody even talks about it, but I figured it would be wrong not to include them because they have the title of Extreme X-Men, even though they're standalone. They have nothing to do with what was going on in the regular universe. They're about all these multi-dimensional misplaced mutants and how they're trying to make it home. And like I said, the series ended up wrapping up with a crossover with the Age of Apocalypse, which we'll get to here in a second. But let's go back to Astonishing X-Men. So this is Astonishing X-Men North Star. This is volume 10 now. Marjorie Liu takes over the scripting duties, and pretty much she gets to transfer the book to the Wolverine team. So this is the Wolverine team of X-Men, because remember, Cyclops and Wolverine had been broken up during this time. So this has a cast of Wolverine, Gambit, Iceman, Karma, North Star, and Cecilia Reyes. And then we also have a bunch of Marauders show up here. But the big thing, of course, here is the big wedding. And you can find out who North Star ends up marrying. And it was a big deal because it was the first wedding of its kind in comic book history. But this came out in an oversized hardcover, a trade paperback, and a standard size hardcover. So now we go back to X-Men Legacy. This is Back to School. And this is now Christos Gage. So sadly, Mike Carey ends up leaving his run right after Schism on X-Men Legacy. We have Christos Gage coming in and writing a lot of these stories in here. So this primarily stars Rogue again as the leader, Frenzy, Rachel Summers, who's in Cannonball, and of course Gambit. And it's got characters that were showing up in the pages. That is an awesome Mark Brooks cover. In the pages of course, X-Men Legacy, but just didn't feel the same. And I love Christos Gage. As you all know, the Avengers Academy is one of my favorite books that Marvel ever put out, and doesn't get enough love. But it just wasn't the same. And honestly, I think Marvel felt the same too. They just didn't know what to do with these characters because they already had Wolverine and the X-Men, so which we'll get to here in a second. But this all takes place during the Wolverine and the X-Men in the school, the Jean Grey School of Gifted Students. Wolverine and the X-Men. So this is a series, by the way, this Omnibus, it's being reprinted. We voted for it in 2020, and it's being reprinted later this year. So here we have Wolverine and the X-Men. So after the big fight in Schism with Cyclops, Wolverine decided to, make his own school for the next generation of gifted students. So of course he named it after Jean Grey. So it is the Jean Grey School of Gifted Students, and he gets a lot of the help from some of his friends. Yes, I love the introduction of these new kids. The artwork is by Chris Bacalo, but he's also joined by Nick Bradshaw. So I suggest strongly to read just the first 8 issues of this, because this sets up the characters of these new kids, but because we're about to have a big crossover. And as promised, we're back to this complete collection after Schism, because this sets the new status quo for the X-Men. So for the first time in years, the title of Uncanny X-Men is renumbered to a number 1. This is unprecedented for this. I mean, even during Onslaught, it didn't get renumbered. X-Men, of course, became New X-Men, and then eventually became X-Men Legacy, and then back to X-Men. I know it gets confusing, but Uncanny X-Men was always left alone. They loved the Legacy number, and for the first time, it was rebranded as a new number 1. And all of this takes place after the events of Schism, and this is where we get Sassy Sinister, who is so awesome. but this is where it all starts. We get Agent Brand plays a bigger role through here, and this is Cyclops' team, separated from Wolverine's team because, you know, they broke up. Alright, so we go back to Adjectiveless X-Men. I swear, this was the hardest list to put together because I'm trying to do a reading order that will benefit everybody. But again, just to keep that in mind, it is my reading order. There are several reading orders out there. If you're not a fan of jumping from book to book, then just stick to one title. If you're a fan of reading book to book, month by month, then I definitely suggest getting the Marvel Unlimited app so you can read this stuff digitally. Then it's easier to keep going back between issue and issue and book after book. So here we have War Machine. This actually was my favorite series of the entire X-Men run during this time right here by Gischler. So now the team of Adjectiveless X-Men is all led by Storm, and this is Psylocke, Colossus, Jubilee, Domino, and Warpath. And they're joined in this particular issue by War Machine. So this is a team up against the Sentinels, and it's got gorgeous artwork by Will Conrad. Colossus still wearing his Juggernaut helmet. And also, I forgot, it also includes another reprint of a classic storyline here with the Sentinels. Alright, remember when I said Jubilee vampire because of the curse of the vampires? Guess what? The curse is broken! Man, that feels good. Jubilee is sort of restored back to normal, right? Sure, she still doesn't have her powers because, you know, the 198 and the whole House of M, but that will change later on. That there will be another crossover, or actually it's not even an X-Men book, it's the Avengers book, the Children's Crusade. But this is the resolution of that particular storyline with Jubilee becoming a vampire. Moving on to Astonishing X-Men Weaponized. This is volume 11, and I want to say this is also towards the end of the run, and these books were at one time just one of the big flagship titles for X-Men. They were selling really well, and the collected editions were selling really well. However, I forgot Warbird. So there's characters that are going to appear in here, but because of my reading order, you're not going to meet them yet until you read Wolverine and the X-Men, but I promise we'll get there. But I think this is the best beneficial way to enjoy X-Men without that many spoilers. Yes, as I was saying, I knew something was going on when the series started being collected only in trade paperback format. It used to be available in standard edition format, but then it started only becoming available in trade paperback format. And I suggest actually wrapping up Astonishing X-Men. So this is Marjorie Liu's story arc. Alright, really quickly, I need to talk about this right here, and that is X-Men Extermination, The Age of Apocalypse. This mainly serves as a crossover with Astonishing X-Men, the Extreme X-Men, and of course the Age of Apocalypse. So it's revisiting some of those characters we've seen, and it wraps up the series of Extreme X-Men, as well as deliver some of the final issues of Astonishing X-Men. And here we have the team of, like I said, Wolverine and some of the members of the Jean Grey School for Gifted Students. There's Warbird right there, who you get to meet in the first issue of Wolverine and the X-Men. But this kind of explores a character. This particular volume, though, I want to say is known for this story arc right here, featuring Iceman. This is probably one of the best story arcs with Iceman in it. Probably regarded as one of the best among a lot of fans of the X-Men and the character of Iceman, Bobby Drake. And a lot, because he's been through a lot of changes and a lot of heartache and struggle, and I feel like he's a character that never really tapped his full potential, because even Professor Xavier at one time had made comments about how Bobby, if he really focused, could freeze the entire world, making him, of course, an Omega mutant. What we're going to be talking about is X-Men Blank Generation. Now, I've seen this being called X-Men by Brian Wood, Volume 1, Blank Generation, but I don't really see that on the title, so this is why I do these reading orders, these visual reading orders, so you can see what the cover of the books look like, because even the covers sometimes, like on Amazon and on eBay, just look a lot different because people use stock pictures of what the solicitation said the covers were going to look like. But nope, this is what the cover looks like. It is the continuation of X-Men, Adjectiveless X-Men, but now it focuses on a different type of team. And honestly, you start seeing where Brian Wood is going. You start seeing a lot of the men leave the team. Pixie takes a bigger role. Jubilee even shows up. And like I said, during this time, she wasn't really a mutant. And then we get the final issue of Adjectiveless X-Men. This is also by Brian Wood. This is Reckless Abandonment. This is co-written by Seth Peck. And both of them are wrapping up the series of Adjectiveless X-Men. And this all leads into the AVX, which I'll talk about here in a second. But also the final 2 issues take place after AVX. But I wanted you to go ahead. You can just go ahead and read it. It's really not going to spoil anything. I don't think there's anything really important that happens in those final issues other than set up the next X-Men series. So you come back to this. Uncanny X-Men by Kieron Gillen, Volume 2. And again, playing with Mr. Sinister, doing a lot of things that I thought was interesting, and having heavy ties to the X-Men, doing things that a lot of the writers weren't doing at the time, having ties to the Celestials. Actually, that's all I will say about his run. I think his run is very underrated and really did wonders for the character of Sinister. But all of this gets interrupted because of this event that's about to happen here in a little bit, and that is the AVX event. As a matter of fact, you're going to be able to see some pages. So my strong suggestion is to read up until about issue number 10 of this, and then go and read AVX, because this really wraps up a lot of the storylines that he was doing with Abigail Brand on S.W.O.R.D, and a lot of his X-Men that he was helping to just flesh out. And then the rest of it is a huge crossover with, well, you'll see here in a second. Now, is this book necessary to read before the event of AVX? Absolutely 100% not. Is it fun to read? It's okay. But would I be disappointed in myself if I didn't include it? You're damn right I would, which is why I included it here, snuck it in here, and it's also part of my list in my written documentation. If you're part of our Patreon, you can see it all written in there, how it all fits in. But yeah, I decided to just include this in here. Written by Jeff Loeb, drawn by Ed McGuinness. Just a quick little... it really has nothing to do with AVX, with the Phoenix Force coming. And that is found in the pages of A versus X. Avengers versus X-Men. The Phoenix Force is coming to Earth. And what does that mean? What does it mean for Hope? Is she related to Jean Grey at all? Why are the Avengers wanting to stop the X-Men from receiving the Phoenix Force? So this is a big crossover with the Avengers that, again, reshapes the lineup of the X-Men. A lot of things changes. It's got beautiful artwork in here. We have the Phoenix 5, and there's a big death at the end that changes the characters for quite a number of years. And I have to talk a little bit about it, and without going into detail exactly how it happens, I'm not even going to show you, but just in case, spoilers. And it's a minor one because this character is also back, but man, this is gorgeous. The character of Charles Xavier is killed in this, and there's a character that is blamed for his death. Whether it was intentional or not, well, you can find out for yourself, but this is AVX, and there's also a companion, which is bigger. By the way, these are not Omnis. These are just oversized hardcover. And this collects issues of Uncanny X-Men. It collects issues of X-Men Legacy. And all the AVX one-shots. So Wolverine and the X-Men. So that's why I said, maybe, stop reading Wolverine and the X-Men on issue 8. Come back here, read this. So nothing gets really spoiled for you. And that's also why I suggested waiting to read this right here. And let's go back to this. By the way, I'm going to do a more thorough overview of both of these. It's a big shout out to one of my young viewers, Maddox. So I have to do it. He asked me, he drew me a picture, so I have to do it. He asked me to do an overview of both of these books. So you got it, buddy. But the wrap up today is AVX, X-Men Legacy. And this is, again, wrapping up the stories that were started by Mike Carey, but then Christos Gage came in and started wrapping up a lot of the loose ends, with Rogue being the leader of the team. But really, at this time, there just wasn't a need for X-Men Legacy anymore. The focus of the story had shifted, and then with the crossover with AVX, they really didn't know what to do with the title. So they decided just to put an end to it. And yeah, some of the characters went over to Wolverine and the X-Men. Some of the characters, well, you'll get to see in part 5. But as of this part, whew, that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing some of these books, don't forget to check out our sponsor, cheapgraphicnovels.com, your online source for collected editions up to 50% off retail price. Cheap Graphic Novels prides itself on excellent packaging, so your stuff gets to you in excellent condition, and they have amazing customer service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And for all you Minties that are watching, if you're a first-time customer, don't forget to mention that Near Mint Condition sent you their way for a promotional credit on free shipping on your next order. Now, this is is only for US customers. CheapGraphicNovels.com, your source for the hottest books with deep discounts, customer service, and excellent shipping that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the X-Men Reading Order Part 4. Again, thank you so much to our patrons for voting for X-Men. And I will be back in another week or so with Part 5. Woo! This one knocked me out. This one was tough. Alright, please, if I left anything out, leave those comments down below. Again, the written documentation will be available on our Patreon here in the next day or so. And if you're interested in joining our Patreon, please don't forget to click on the link in the description below. And we also have a link down there to our spread shop where you can get our logo and our brands on stickers, sweatshirts, t-shirts, mugs, whatever it is that you need. Again, both links are in the description below. If you have any more questions, please also leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. More importantly, everyone, please stay healthy, stay safe, and much love.